Good evening, Mia, Nicole.
Hey, good evening, Suki. Good evening, Nicola.
Mute. Good evening. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone. I can't believe you guys all agreed to come out. Thank you.
That's good.
It is. Hopefully, I'm going to really try to keep this meeting short. I think we have 3 or 4 things that we should still discuss. So let's try to take about 10 minutes for each of those. They're mostly things where I think we didn't comment because it's not clear what the impact would be on CB9. Um, and just in general, I think it's preferable to let community boards make these decisions individually rather than having a citywide text amendment. But let's talk about them. Maybe we can take like 10 or 15 minutes for each of those 3 or 4 things we didn't talk about to kind of wrap them up just so we have something to say. And then, let's vote on the whole thing because I think the summary looks good. Um, okay, let's see who else is coming. We're still waiting on Vanessa. She should be here soon. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Andrew. Good evening, Beverly. Good evening, Alicia. Good evening, Regina. Good evening, John.
Good evening.
Good evening, Suki.
Good evening.
Can we email or share the link? I don't know how we do it, or email to the people who did not receive the link over the weekend, the people
Okay,
that
so
aren't
I'm
on the
going to
committee?
share my screen with the new version that we have that we commented on as well.
Okay.
Oh boy. Okay, hold on. Um,
I don't hear anything. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone?
Good evening, Ms. Westerdahl.
Thank you.
Suki is accessing her screen. We can hear you. Thank you.
All right. Good evening. I can't hear Suki. I just see your mouth going. Suki, you got to
I'm
turn off your.
sorry. Okay. So let's get started without further ado. As I said before, we are here to approve the summarized and reformatted version of the resolution that we passed through the subcommittee at our last meeting and the land use committee at the meeting on December 5th. So as I said, basically, Nicola took a first cut at doing this summary. I think that she did a good job. She highlighted a few things a few of the proposals that we hadn't discussed. Mostly these are proposals where we didn't discuss them because it's not clear how they would apply to CB9, but they might. So it's probably just as well for us to say something. And then the casino text amendment also dropped right around the time that we had our meeting, so we didn't discuss that yet. Again, it may not apply to CB9, but we should still have something to say. So let's take maybe like 10 minutes to go through each of those and then go over the whole thing. And just, for the members of the public or those who might not have read over this, let's read over the summarized version. And if you could do that, Nicola. I have it up on the screen here, but just, Nicola, if you could read it to the rest of us, that would be, I think, helpful.
Okay. Can you hear me? All right. We at Community Board 9 oppose the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity text amendments in their entirety. These are citywide text amendments which will result in broad brush changes across New York City, a complex city of 5 boroughs with neighborhoods of varied zoning, mass transit access, population size, etc. We continue to be concerned about the fact that these recommendations were made without conducting planning studies on the current commercial corridor conditions, i.e. vacancies, rents, etc., within each community district prior to deciding if zoning changes were needed. We believe a full environmental impact statement must be conducted on these sweeping changes because the current language in these text amendments places us at great risk of irreversible unintended consequences, negatively impacting the peace, quiet, security, health, parking on residential blocks and in residential buildings. City resources are already stretched. Who will monitor and enforce adherence to guidelines as the lines between residential, commercial, and manufacturing zones are further blurred? In addition to our opposition of the individual proposals, which clearly apply to our district, we discovered numerous objectionable changes throughout the 664 pages of zoning text, which were not mentioned in the original public presentations held by the Department of City Planning, DCP, in July and September. These changes, combined with the questionable negative environmental assessment, raise red flags suggesting an unacceptable intent to do away with nearly all zoning distinctions and environmental standards while evading public review. We therefore urge DCP to start again by consulting community boards first. The following is a summary of our feedback and concerns regarding the specific text amendment proposals and several other text changes. While we understand the text amendments are citywide, our feedback is based upon how they work. Note, CB9 is primarily a residential neighborhood. Most of our residential areas are located within 2 to 3 blocks of a retail corridor. Our non-residential spaces are either part of mixed-use residential buildings, C13 and C23 commercial overlay districts, or our commercial or manufacturing, C82 or M1 districts, adjacent to residential buildings and zones. Our Economic Development Committee has found that several of our commercial zones have had persistent vacancies in recent years, due in part to raising rents, lack of access to capital, and spaces held for years in anticipation of redevelopment. This implies CB9 does not need additional commercial space. Furthermore, CB9 is already a densely built community, and we would prefer to support the city's efforts to provide by maintaining our existing housing stock as much as possible, rather than undermining those efforts by allowing conversion of residential space to. Okay, so that is the summary. And then we begin to detail feedback against each of the proposals. So I'm going to pause and see if there are any comments or changes, edits that anyone would like to make to the overview, to the summary. Is everyone comfortable with that summary statement?
Alicia?
No, I'm sorry. I'm comfortable. I apologize.
Okay. All right. So why don't we start by going over these proposals one by one? As I said, there are 3 or 4 that we hadn't discussed. So let's take maybe about 10 minutes to discuss each one. So proposal 1, which is lift time limits to reactivating vacant storefronts. So the issue here, I think, is that there are areas that have grandfathered ground floor commercial, but they're no longer zoned for commercial activity. They're currently zoned for all residential. And when they're vacant for more than a certain period of time, I think it's 2 years, then they can no longer resume commercial activity without going back to the BSA. So this issue has not come up in our district yet. It doesn't mean that it can't. We do have certain areas that have this grandfathered commercial activity, but actually are in all residential zoning. It has come up in Manhattan, in mixed use areas that were subsequently rezoned for residential. A lot of these neighborhoods specifically wanted it that way. They wanted it to be all residential. And so the idea that the storefronts might eventually fade away might be appropriate for them. I don't know, how we would feel about this. It may be different from block to block. And so my initial reaction was, rather than making this a citywide text amendment to make this as of right and not have any review, I think that we would be better off allowing every community to review each individual proposal block by block. There are different situations in every block. There may be blocks that were mistakenly had their commercial zoning eliminated. There are blocks where it was intentional that it was eliminated. And, we may want to assess whether we want that to continue or not, but that choice is being taken away from us. And so I don't think that's a good idea. Anyone else?
I raised my hand.
Alicia?
I'm just for a point of clarity. Are we going by Robert's Rules of Order in this meeting today?
We generally do, yes.
Okay. then it's really important that the chair does not express their opinion on matters until after everyone has spoken. And that is part of Robert's Rules of Order. So I'm just pushing it out there. Because the chair should not engage in a yes or no until after everyone has spoken. So my position on this particular amendment is that we definitely should say no, because what they're doing is they're actually doing the reverse. We're supposed to be in a housing crisis, and we're supposed to be wanting as much housing as we possibly can. And here we have an opportunity of converting commercial places into residential. And now we're taking that away and actually going back against the whole idea of residential buildings. So I think that we definitely should say no to that. And second, I think it's important that we begin to also support other community boards, even though the issue may not necessarily be here on our community board. I think that we need to start thinking collectively as a city, because these are citywide amendments, and we should be supporting other community. I've been to other community boards in Manhattan. They definitely do not like this particular proposal because, as Suki has stated, there are a lot of places inside of Manhattan that have this 2-year rule, and they definitely do not want these spaces to go back into commercial. They really want these spaces to be residential, especially as there's, again, a housing crisis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. Vanessa, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I think that plus, sorry, I lost my voice, but if a landlord can't rent out a commercial space for 2 years, then they're charging too much, and they should somehow pay the price for that, and to just let them do whatever they want, which seems like this would do, seems like a mistake. Like 2 years is a very long time to rent out a commercial spot. You're charging too much or something.
That's a very good point. Anybody else? Okay, do we want to then put a comment in here? I'm going to take a stab at putting in a comment. Why don't we say CB9 believes that community board CB9 opposes this proposal because we believe that each community board should be able to review the, okay, for whether commercial use remains appropriate, as well as to encourage landlords to keep spaces occupied by renting at reasonable rates. Okay. Can everybody see what I wrote? Any comments? Anybody want to fix this, amend this?
Yeah, well, I don't, am I trying to use my hand? Am I raising my hand?
You're not raising your hand now, but yeah, now it's up.
Okay.
Okay, Alicia?
You didn't mention the fact that we are in a housing crisis.
Housing crisis. Yeah.
And this will substantially reduce future housing.
Well, I mean, do we know that? I don't think that we actually know how many spaces this applies.
Well, it doesn't matter whether the idea is that they have to convert it to residential. That's the rule. So I'm not talking about the number. I'm talking about the fact that if they don't, after 2 years, have a commercial space, they have to convert it into a residential space.
I mean, I also disagree that I mean, I think that the situation might be different in every case, right?
It's the rule. I don't know about it being different in every case. The rule is
What I mean to say is I think that every community board should be allowed to make that determination for themselves, right? I think that I think normally after 2 years, doesn't it go back to the BS? If it was a grandfathered use, doesn't it go back to the BSA?
No, does not go back to BSA. The landlord has to convert it into a residential after 2 years. That's the rule. It's a rule. If they want to break that rule, then they would probably have to go back to the BSA.
Right.
But not if they don't want to break that rule. The rule is there. I don't know if they can go back to the BSA or not. The rule is there.
I mean, I'm just thinking like there may have, as particularly with COVID, there may have been circumstances where they were empty because for an extra long period of time because of the pandemic, right? And I think that it may be okay for them to go back to the BSA for that reason, but or like there actually are cases in our community board where for some reason there are areas that have been commercial for a long time, for decades, but they simply don't have commercial zoning, and it could have been an oversight. We actually had a couple of liquor license applicants come up recently who do not have commercial zoning I think it's on Franklin Avenue in Crown Heights. So, you know, I just don't want to say that it should always be the case that they have to convert to residential zoning. I
don't think that that's what I said. That's not what I said. I said that the law should not be changed because it encourages residential development in a housing crisis. That particular rule encourages residential development in the housing crisis. It says if you can't not occupy a commercial space after 2 years, then you have to convert it into residential. That encourages residential development.
Okay. Anybody else?
Suki, are we? It's a couple things.
Uh-huh.
I'm a business person. I own a commercial space. I'm not able to rent out the commercial space. Let's just say I get a tax deduction for monies lost every year. So that's one of the things that encourage the no rush. But secondly, if I own a commercial space and I'm turning it over into an apartment, commercial spaces make more money than, say, let's just say they take one of the storefronts on Franklin that used to be the incense shop. He or she is not going to be able to rent it at the rate that they make if they were a business. So I'm saying that to say, to force them to be residential, I can see them going back and fighting for that because they make more money commercially than they would residentially. Because if they price the apartment too high, they're in the same situation they were when it was a commercial space. They're not going to be able to rent it. And it's on the ground floor of New York City.
So So then that would encourage them to get the place rented. And
Commercially.
that's not changing the current rule. That would encourage people to not warehouse their commercial space and get it rented if they're in that kind of zone.
Okay,
Not
I actually like that.
This is the current rule is we're not changing the current rule. We're saying keep the current rule as it is, which is that if you don't rent it out in 2 years, you got to switch it back to residential. Obviously,
Okay.
you don't need the commercial space.
So I actually like that language, Nicola. Should we say as well as to prevent warehousing of commercial space? I kind of like that.
Mhm. I'd prefer to rent it cheaply and keep it commercial, right? Given what you're saying, Beverly.
Well, I mean, if it sounded like I was arguing for it to be residential, I apologize for that because I think it should stay commercial. Because too, we're building all these apartments, and we have no services in these communities.
Okay, so what
So
do you? So you
that's
want
the next
you want to change the rule because the rule currently says that in certain areas, if you don't rent it in 2 years, then it
You
flips
change
back.
it to an apartment.
Changing anything right now. They're asking for a change. We're saying
Yeah.
keep the rule as it is.
And I got to be honest, given how many apartments are going up and how few services are going up, I'm inclined to one, let it stay the way it is and find another way to prevent them from warehousing the space. Because right now, we have to go to another community to get our services, like it was in the 70s and the 80s. We outside of grocery shopping, that's not.
This doesn't apply to CB9. This rule does not apply to CB9. We don't have any of those spaces here.
Well,
space
we don't know that may not be I think we may have spaces that we may have these grandfathered commercial spaces, but I don't want to comment at the moment on, what we think should be done with those spaces.
Right.
I just think that we should argue for the fact that we have the right to make that determination if and when the issue comes up.
Okay. Us allowing us the right. Yes. Okay.
Okay, so are we good with this? We should probably move
Sure.
on to the,
Hey, Suki, I've had my hand
Yeah,
raised
John.
for a little bit. Just to clarify,
yes,
and make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, these are essentially non-conforming uses, a non-conforming commercial use in a
yes,
residential zone.
yes.
So we're not talking about Nostrand Avenue with an overlay or anything like that. It's
No,
Maple
these
Street
are-
and someone has a tailoring shop on the ground floor.
yes.
That's been there for 110 years.
Yes.
That's it. So we're not talking about wholesale district changes. It's unusual, rare, and sprinkled about, and probably not in, or maybe in a spot or two in CB9.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
So
I don't
it's
think
not
it's
a-
like one, I don't think it's like one site. It could be more than that, but it's
Okay.
not everywhere, definitely.
Okay. I think there's plenty of vacant storefronts on Nostrand, on Rogers, on Flatbush, that if someone needs a business space, they can go into one of the vacant spaces. There's lots of
If
vacant
the rent
spaces.
isn't crazy. If the rent isn't crazy, yes,
Well,
I agree.
Right, but again, we're talking about non-conforming uses in residential zones where it's your next door neighbors running a tailor shop or a dry cleaner or something of that order. Right? I mean,
So
that's what
I
it is.
I think it's more common. Like all of New York Ave doesn't have commercial overlays, and there's businesses, restaurants, etc. on every street corner.
Right. And I guarantee you that if they were forced out, people would be mad because they like some of those businesses, right? But maybe others they feel are not so appropriate and they would rather it be phased out. So this is why I'm saying I don't particularly want to, comment on each individual situation until it becomes a situation. But I think that we should have the right to say, because we're the ones who kind of know what's happening on the ground. We know what the deal is.
So I
Okay,
wanted to
Suki,
make
I
a
agree.
comment on the point on this matter. I have my hand up.
Yeah, sorry,
So
Regina, go ahead.
for point one, which we are on, I'm happy with the way it's written as it's general based on what all people have already said. There's all sorts of nuances. So as long as it's a CB9 conversation and it stays as a local decision, then I think we've covered the feedback concern for this particular matter, the purpose of this meeting.
Okay, yeah, I think we're all sort of agreed that we're opposed. That's not right. So that's not hard. It's just, like maybe we're all coming at it from slightly different angles, which is good. It's good to hear the different perspectives. Okay, so committee, are we I don't know if I really want to vote on each thing individually. I just want to vote on the whole thing, but are we basically okay with this? Is anyone opposed?
I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm
All right.
okay with it.
Okay, so proposal 4, the loading dock rules. I do not have a comment on this one. Maybe it'll come back to bite us at some point. Does anyone else know more about this and want to? Alicia?
No,
When
I
it's-
mean, go ahead. Somebody
No,
else.
no, no. Go ahead, Alicia.
Loading docks are important, especially when you're determining certain types of businesses, because these text amendments are basically allowing all types of businesses to exist almost everywhere, except for some exceptions in the C7 district, commercial district. I think that you should allow, or there should be mandated that loading docks are done. They're basically eliminating the loading dock rules, and basically saying you don't have to do loading docks, but there might be businesses that require that. And then what happens when you don't have a loading dock? How does that interfere with traffic? How does it interfere with, people walking down the block and other businesses? I think this is just basically a giveaway so that developers don't have to accommodate within the community and have loading docks.
Regina?
Mandated as they are currently.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. Regina?
I appreciate Alicia's point, and I think this is maybe wherever we have, I don't know if there's any more, no comments, just the general local CB9 conversations, because there may be nuances that are specific to us as they arrive, since none of us are experts. I don't want to say none, maybe there are some, but it'll leave room to make sure it's clear that we wanted to keep it local. That's all.
Anybody else? Architects, do you guys know what the actual rules are and how they're changing?
Rod has his hand raised.
Rod?
So yeah, I guess my concern is that we really have to understand what the architects and the rules are. I believe that loading docks are very important based on the business at hand. You could just take a look at Manhattan around 2nd and 3rd Avenues when you have all these businesses receiving deliveries, and traffic is jammed at the height of the peak hour of rush hour, whatever. And loading docks are very, very important based on the type of business. And I don't think that's something that we should just eliminate on its entirety.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Anybody else? Can the two architects, do you guys know what the rules are and what they're changing them to?
Eliminate.
I believe the loading dock requirements are by use type, right? I don't know this change off the top of my head, but I think in our district, I live on Lincoln, and the UPS store that moved into the ground floor on Lincoln and Flatbush, they should have installed a loading dock, but they're not going to. I think I don't know. And of course, there's a huge traffic issue with that. But I think providing flexibility and not having a loading dock, I think it's got to be on a case-by-case basis, honestly. Most of the larger businesses that are moving in, most of the architecture, most of the space we got in the city, it already exists. To retrofit that, to add a 14 to 16 foot loading berth, which is the minimum requirement in dense transit zone districts, is not feasible.
And that you're talking about retrofits now, as opposed to new buildings.
Yeah, I mean, for new buildings, yeah, do whatever, but most of what we got is existing.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah. And do the rules also depend on the size of the business? Because like the UPS business, for example, it's not that big. The size of the store is not that big. But like to Rod's point, yeah, the other day I was at a Trader Joe's in Manhattan on I think it was 3rd Avenue, and I actually took a picture of it. It was so striking. The trucks were unloading a new delivery, and they had to block off an entire section of the street with traffic cones, as well as taking up most of the sidewalk to do their loading and unloading. And I'm not blaming them. I can understand that that's what they need, but that is the impact that it has when you have an extremely large store. So yeah. Okay, so all right, so what do we want to say here? So do we want to say basically like CB9 believes that loading dock requirements should be carefully reviewed on a case-by-case basis to prevent excessive traffic congestion and traffic and sidewalk congestion or something like that?
If you do that, you're basically changing the current rules.
Well, okay, so tell us what the current rule is and what they're
Current rules
changing
are
to.
based upon the type of business and the commercial zone in which it exists in, you have to provide loading docks. They're trying to just eliminate the requirement for loading.
Okay, so what exactly is the rule? Which zones require loading docks?
I didn't look at all of that. I mean,
okay, see, this is why I don't have a comment.
because you
But
don't
I'm waiting for you guys to, say if you think this is important enough that we should have a comment. Does someone know what the rule is?
The rule is the elimination of loading dock requirements. That's the new rule that they're proposing. I don't think that should happen.
Do we know that?
Yes, by reading the text amendment. I read the text amendment.
Okay, so read it to us, Alicia. Read us the text amendment.
I'm not going back to read those text amendments, Suki. That was your job, not mine. I'm telling you, that's what the text amendments are. It's an elimination of the loading docks rule. If you don't believe me, that's fine. Don't believe me, but that's what it is. You can just say that you would like the rules to remain the same. That
All
would
right,
be
Regina.
I mean, definitely there is that option of keeping it the same, but I mean, it shouldn't be. Okay, so rephrasing it, I feel like I agreed with what you were starting to say, but until you started to get too detailed, Suki, regarding, if anybody can recall what you started saying the first sentence, but that was good. And then not.
It was similar to number 1.
But yeah, not adding the nuances, but keeping it,
Because we oppose a blanket change that would eliminate loading dock rules. Because basically they're trying to, I'm looking at one of the slides, they want to address loading rules that hamper changes of use. And we're saying, no, we don't want blanket changes to the loading dock rules.
How about that? CB9 believes that a blanket elimination of loading dock requirements citywide is inappropriate.
And yeah.
Do we not feel obligated to say at least one reason why?
I think, what I was, something about reserving the right based on neighborhood or whatever, but not too specific. If anyone can help me out with that, but reserving the right for specific case-by-case needs.
Because
maybe just make a comment about traffic is bad enough. Like,
I think that's a good point.
All loading
docks.
Yeah.
So I invite us. Western Beef has a loading dock. There's a grocery store in the corner of Brooklyn and I want to say Montgomery. It's on the right hand side. it doesn't have one. Seatown doesn't have one. And when on Wednesdays come, those guys are blocking up traffic on the sidewalk, just like the example that someone listed. When Western Beef has transfer trucks pulling in and out, and the only thing they do is block traffic for the truck to back in and for the truck to pull out. So it says that a blanket elimination of loading dock requirements citywide is inappropriate. Someone listed it stops up. When Suki first started this, someone talked about how it backs up traffic. I think you gave the example of Trader Joe's in Manhattan or something like that, because the difference in those three stores, I've watched them both. Western Beef is a bigger store and it has bigger trucks, but it caused less interference. Where the other stores that I mentioned are a whole lot smaller and they block traffic when they're loading.
There is actually a existence. All right, now I remember. So there's a grocery store on New York Ave and Schenectady. It always blocks every time they're loading. I have to walk. You have to. Yeah. It blocks the sidewalk, so you definitely see traffic and all that stuff. So we do actually have an existing issue with the grocery store already, and it is nuanced. The traffic does get a little off, and yes, so we do definitely.
Okay, so why don't we say this? We already suffer from traffic congestion and narrow sidewalks, but also recognize, and this is to Andrew's point, that retrofits may be difficult for older buildings. Does that work for people?
I don't think that the text amendment refer to retrofitting of existing businesses. Is for new construction.
Okay, I mean, you know, we don't really, as Regina said, we don't need an excessive level of detail. I think we could just leave it at, we can just leave it at this too. Right. We already suffer from traffic congestion and narrow sidewalks. I mean, I think that really honestly covers us. All right, we need to move on. Okay, let's see what else. Okay. I'm going to skip 12 for now. Let's go to 15. So this is actually the second part of 16, which was what we discussed at our last meeting, that for these large scale developments, developers would like to be able to add commercial space. You know, they want to be able to get a BSA permit to add more commercial space. So what we had discussed at the last meeting and what the committee voted, you know, so John Wolfling had told us that the large scale development zoning text already permits 2% of the total floor area to be devoted to commercial. And what he was suggesting was some developers would like to be able to go a little bit higher, maybe to 3% or something like that. Would that be such a big deal? And so Esteban had commented, okay, fine, but how high do you want to go? You know, do you want to go to 10%? You know, there are no limits in the way that this, you know, in this text amendment to how high they might want to go. And so the committee all seemed to think at that point that this should be an issue for rezoning, not simply a BSA approval. And the difference is that the BSA, yes, it would come to the community board for review. It would go to the BSA. The BSA requires an environmental review, but the council member is not given the opportunity to weigh in on this as they would with an actual rezoning. And, you know, although we may sometimes, not agree with our council members, they're actually the ones who have the power to say no and to extract concessions from a developer. So we thought that this should not, this proposal should not go forward. So do we want to stick with that? Do we want to maybe state that only de minimis increases in the amount of commercial should be approved by the BSA? What is de minimis?
Yeah, what is it?
I raised my hand.
Okay, Alicia?
This definitely is opening up a can of worms that should not even be opened. I mean, you should not, to think that a BSA permit will allow a developer to build, commercial space in a residential building, the sky is the limit at this point in time. According to the text amendment that I read, there was no restriction on heights. There was no restriction on square footage. It was just, oh, if you want to do this, go get a BSA permit. And we know that BSA permits have a high percentage of approval. And as you noted, the city council does not weigh in on this. It's just an agency approval. And agencies' approvals, especially the BSA, is just really, a bad thing. So I don't think at all should we be even talking about incremental, because that just gets into another request. We shouldn't be making that kind of determination. I mean, they're trying to put casinos inside of residential buildings. So, just imagine a casino coming into your neighborhood in a residential complex, which could actually happen as of right, with just the BSA then agreeing to it. So I think you should stay away from this and just say an absolutely no. They should remain very limited amount of commercial space, which normally keeps commercial on the ground floor of a residential building for the most part.
So we're saying no, keep the requirement that a rezoning is needed.
Yeah, when you
Right,
want
is
to
that
change.
what we're doing?
Mhm.
Right.
Yes.
Anybody
you
else?
look.
Sorry.
You
Anybody
look.
else want to weigh in on this?
I'm sorry, state the question again.
Okay, so do we want to stick with our straight no vote, or do we want to say that de minimis increases, however, we define that, if we say de minimis is an extra 1%, or de minimis is, de minimis, how the BSA defines it, whatever, could be approved by the BSA. Because it is typical, actually, for the BSA to approve these very small tweaks to zoning when a developer comes to ask them for it, whereas larger changes are subject to full ULURP and the council member approval.
But not in this case. With this text amendment, that will not happen.
It is not. So I'm asking if, we should say anything to that, if we should just say hell no, or if we should say hell no, but, right?
But aren't we saying no, keep it the way it is? And if keeping it the way it is means that a BSA can approve a small change, then that's the current process. We're not changing anything.
Well, no,
Why mention it?
actually, so BSA normally gets to approve changes in things like FAR, but there isn't a special permit defined to, like in this case, they're not asking for an overall increase in FAR. They're just asking for a little bit more commercial instead of residential. And there isn't a BSA special permit currently defined to allow them to do that. So the answer is no. I mean, it would fit in with what the BSA normally does, but it doesn't currently exist in the code.
My
Oh,
hand is,
I see
I
your,
say no, keep it straight now.
okay.
I just want to just clarify something. They didn't say anything about a small increase in commercial space. That means is that a developer can ask for whatever increase they choose, and it would just be up to the BSA to decide that. So I don't think that that statement is correct when you say a small increase in commercial. There's nothing in
Well,
the text.
that's part of the problem. As written, I think we all agree that we would reject that, but do we want to offer any additional feedback, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think it should just be a straight no, and that's it.
Okay.
Don't open up Pandora's box to, oh, but just a small increase would be okay. That just opens up Pandora's box, and then you get a yes with conditions on this particular proposal.
Anybody else?
Unfortunately, I have to agree, Suki,
Okay.
because a little for us could be different. A little is subjective, and a straight no is a straight no. A developer comes in and he goes, well, this is a little, you know what I mean? I think a straight no is the best way to go unless something else arises. Because this is assuming that we're thinking what they're thinking, and that's never the case.
Okay. I think that makes sense. I think we can say no. And if they want to come back and resubmit with something that is more reasonable, they can do that, but as we've seen with developers, they frequently just keep coming back with the same crap.
Right.
Okay. So is the consensus that we're going to stick with our original no vote?
Yes, just a simple
Yes.
no.
Yes to no.
Okay. All right. Sounds good to me. So what we're going to say is CB9 opposes this proposal. As E key is falling off. That increases in the amount of commercial space and council members should retain the right to negotiate Okay, does that work for people? CB9 opposes this proposal as we believe that community boards and council members should retain the right to negotiate increases in the amount of commercial space through the ULURP process.
That works for me.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
It works for me.
All right. What else do we need to move on to? What's something here? Okay, 18, create new kinds of zoning districts for future job hubs. So we did not discuss this. As you can see, I put in a comment here on the right side that what they were talking about was introducing new zoning districts. We have M1 zoning districts right now that are at a 1.0 FAR. That is a very, very low FAR. They want to introduce 2 new zoning districts, and I think M2 is at a 2.0 FAR. They want to introduce 2 new zoning districts at 3.0 FAR and 4.0 FAR with heights of up to 15 feet. However, they are not yet mapping this anywhere in the city. So they're not saying that they're necessarily going to rezone our M1 districts. They're just creating new districts. So that was one of the reasons that we didn't comment on this yet, is it's not clear how and where this is going to apply yet. No one in CB9 has yet asked for this type of an upzoning, although we do have an M1 district. But I think that I believe that there have been requests for this in other places, like maybe in Williamsburg. Comments?
Just a question.
Yes, Alicia.
You said 150 feet?
Yes. Yes, I think it's
That's
going to be
15
up to 15 stories. I'm sorry, did I say, if I said 15
Yeah.
feet, it's up to
Yeah.
15 stories.
That's a lot of stories to go into a manufacturing zone without the EULA process, even though they're trying to now also eliminate that. This is a massive upzoning. And, here what's confusing about this request is that here you're merging the manufacturing groups into commercial corridors. You're taking both group 17 and group 18 as light manufacturing and heavy manufacturing groups, and you're merging them into the use groups, and then you're allowing the use groups to be in the commercial corridors. But now you want to take the manufacturing districts and you want to increase their billable space. Why? What's the rationale for that? Also, you're talking about a massive rezoning that hasn't even had an environmental review. You're now, 2 or 3 stories, 4 or 5 stories. Now you're at 15 stories. What would the impact on these, on the manufacturing districts, especially because they literally border residential, buildings and apartments and private homes. So this is a massive rezoning without any type of, EULA process. So I would definitely say no.
When it came up, when I looked at the planning commission hearing, they were asking about that. This definitely would require a environmental review, and the feedback was, we're just creating the category. The environmental impact would come on when we're actually doing a rezoning, when we are selecting the spots that could possibly have this zone. And that's when we would do the environmental impact. So that was their pushback, to say this is just a category, nothing has been changed yet.
So let me just get this right.
Mm-hmm.
You're creating a district, and the district is like a M1-2. You're creating the district. You
Mm-hmm.
already putting the parameters around the district, and you're telling me that's not an upzoning?
It's not tied to anything. There are no lots that will have this designation.
So they're making the claim that then you would have to go in and do an environmental assessment statement or a EULA process if you want to then take that particular designation and apply it to that particular lot.
Yes.
Saying. But at the same time, don't forget M1 district can also have residential on them. And they're trying to right now put a rule in place where any building below 25 stories won't even have an environmental review process. This is the new text amendment that I was going to ask you guys, are you dealing with that? Because that's already come down through the community board and it has to be voted upon. So they're misleading you, because if you create the district And then you create the new rule that says you don't have to do an environmental impact on anything that's 25 stories or below, then there will be no environmental impact. Are people following me with that understanding?
Yeah,
So-
so
Yeah.
what Alicia's talking about is the green fast track amendment, which we should definitely talk about at our next subcommittee meeting. But just to, get through this, does anybody else have any comments?
They're not creating a new category without a vision. They're just not sharing the vision with us.
Exactly.
Yeah, they played a long game.
Yeah,
So, I mean, we could say that for now, we are opposing this because we know that this in combination with other text amendments, such as the green fast track, could place our communities at risk with no environmental reviews on the impact.
yeah. So what my feeling was, I agree that once it's out there, somebody is going to, there are going to be property owners who are going to ask for this, for an upzoning to these new categories. What DCP presented initially was this idea that, we're going to have sort of like new technology, light industry, things that are almost more like office uses, where the higher density might be appropriate. Like if you think about some of those buildings in like Dumbo and, Industry City and so on, like, for example, I always pass it on the highway. Etsy has their offices in a big converted warehouse building in Dumbo. And these old warehouse buildings are pretty high density. They're not necessarily like 15 stories, but yeah, a lot of them are like the equivalent of 9 to 12 stories. You also have a lot of these buildings in Soho, these former manufacturing buildings that are quite high density and so on, but they currently really have office uses. The issue, one of the issues I had looking at this text amendment was it's not restricted to, it doesn't, these new higher density zones are not restricted to those, to office uses or even, kind of like very light industrial. It could be anything. And the whole point of the lower density for manufacturing zones, especially for M1 zones, which are designed to be transition zones between residential and heavy industrial, is to limit the the environmental impact. If you have it at a very high density, that is going to multiply those impacts, right? I mean, like there's a reason we don't have these 9-10 story factory buildings anymore like we did in the 19th century, because that's, it's dangerous. But yeah, if we were to say, like, do we want to allow a 9-story building that's basically an office use? The hospital, I think, already has some pretty big buildings on their campus that are for medical use or for office use. I don't know, maybe, but we can't really know until they decide to map it somewhere near us and we know what the proposal is. But I'm not thrilled about the way it's written, that there are no use restrictions whatsoever. And as Alicia said, in combination with something like green fast track, it could be very dangerous. So yeah, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily want to disapprove it, because there may be districts where this is appropriate and they already know what it's going to be used for, but I have concerns.
I like what Nicola suggested earlier. That sentence I'm quite aligned with, because it does call out other issues, but it's broad enough, but clear enough that we oppose it with a bit of insight.
Okay, so do we want to say again, like what? Okay, what was it that you wanted to say?
You're asking me to remember what I said?
Yeah.
Hoping and praying.
It's 8:07. I know.
That we were opposed to it, especially given other text amendments that may, in combination with other text amendments that may place our communities at risk. I don't remember what the
Okay.
rest of it was.
How about this? CB9 opposes the introduction of higher density manufacturing districts in combination with the green fast track seeker amendments that would eliminate environmental reviews. Although, you know, guys, they are saying with respect to the green fast track that it would not affect anything that goes through a rezoning or a ULURP process. And in order to go from M1 to one of the new districts, they would need to rezone. So
Well, that's not exactly what the green fast track says. What the green track says is there's going to be a type 2 on these types of developments. So anything that's below 25 stories occupies a certain amount of space will be exempt from an environmental review.
right, but that doesn't apply to, but it's not going to apply to things that need to go through a rezoning.
Right, but the only power that community boards have is the environmental review. It's just a disclosure statement, first of all. So you're even removing the disclosure statement and you're giving the community no power to object to a rezoning. I mean, if you think about this, you're talking about a manufacturing zone that now will be able to be allowed to have 15 stories, and you will not have an environmental review, even though they're pushing the original one here saying, oh, but it's going to have an environmental review, but it's not. So they're lying, basically. They know what these text amendments are coming down for. That means we have no environmental review. That means we have no power to object.
So we just say may. So
I think we need to take the time to go through the green fast track amendments that they were actually, Dante just actually sent them out.
Okay, I'm not going through that tonight. So all I'm
No.
saying is that this higher density manufacturing district in combination with, this is being packaged with several other text amendments, such as the green fast track seeker amendment, which may place our community at risk due to the elimination of environmental reviews.
Okay, how about
and other
this?
impacts that we don't even know.
How about this? CB9 opposes the introduction of higher density manufacturing districts without use limitations on those districts and without environmental reviews. That work? Then we don't have to talk about green fast track or whatever. We can deal with that next month, which we should.
Well, currently they would have to do an environmental review. If the green track does not pass, then they would have to do an environmental review.
I agree. So I think we should just say that
with the potential, I think.
Right. So, but here we're just saying that we don't want this to happen unless we have environmental review. So if you're going to take that away in some fashion, however you do it, because they're not going to stop. They're just going to keep throwing this crap at us. If green fast track doesn't pass, they'll come up with something else. So I think we basically just have to make the general point that this is not acceptable without a full environmental review. Let's see, just yes.
I'm fine for now. The bottom line is we oppose it.
Yeah.
And then when we get to the green fast track, we will say we oppose it and we are looking at how this may impact manufacturing district rezonings or what new categories.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And even when it comes to a rezoning, if there ever is a proposal for a rezoning, I think it's going to have to be reviewed for height and density, because these are next to residential, and I'm sure people are going to have something to say about that. Okay, so do we have anything else? Okay, casinos. So Nicola says we should do that separately. That's fine. So we'll just make a separate page afterwards. What do we think about this? First of all, does everyone know what the casino zoning text amendment says?
I have my hand raised.
Well, okay, are just to the question of does everyone know what the casino zoning text amendment says?
No, I don't.
Okay.
That makes
So the
sense.
casino zoning text amendment that came out would be to permit casinos in C4, C6, C8, and M1 districts. And approval would not go through the ULURP process because under current zoning law, it's not clear that casinos are permitted. So approvals would go through a special commission composed of local elected officials at the state and city level, plus that would be like 2 members of the 6-member commission, plus 4 members appointed by the mayor, I think, or maybe it's 2 by the mayor and 2 by the governor. But basically, your local elected officials would be 2 of the members. However, it would bypass the community boards. And I'm sure you probably are all aware that there are current requests or proposals to put in casinos in Flushing, in Times Square, and I think there's like a Racino somewhere out in Southeast Queens now that wants to convert to a full casino.
Coney Island?
At this point,
Alicia, you had your
Racetrack.
hand raised.
yes, it's really important that people read the text amendment because there's nothing in the text amendment that says anything about that commission. This is something that kind of bringing up. I don't know where they're inserting that because it's definitely not within the text amendment. The only thing within the text amendments is the allowing of casinos to now exist in any commercial zones on the specific commercial zones, as C4, C5, and et cetera, as Suki has stated. And they would be as of right. So that means is that they, according to the text amendment, there's nothing in the text amendment that says this commission has to approve it. So please read the text amendment. It's really important. This will allow casinos in, and so I'm looking at our district. We have a C8 district. That's Empire Boulevard. They can put a casino there. And they can put anything else that a casino would need in order for it to fully operate. And the casino would have no size limit. So that means you could possibly even put a small casino, because the CA2 is a small, still zoned small. So you could put a small casino, but then you can have all the restaurants, you can have all the hotels, you can have everything else that will support a casino in your neighborhood. And wouldn't Empire Boulevard be an ideal space for that? I mean, we're next to the park, we're next to the garden, we have all this transportation. Right now, they're looking at the, Queens and Manhattan. But if this text amendment goes through, it could be anywhere because that's what the text said, right? The text is allowing it as of right. No other thing. It's an as of right deal. And so, yes, it will bypass the community boards. We will not have any input because they're making the claim that the state will be doing their own environmental, review. And so that it doesn't need to be redundant, but this is not just about an environmental review. This is also about a community, whether a community wants a very invasive industry that would cause havoc on the residential community to be in their community. And this text amendment says, you do not have a voice. Neither the city council, not even the Department of City Planning has a voice in these proposals. So they can put it anywhere that they choose, basically in commercial districts. And our C8 is really at risk. Empire Boulevard is really at risk for that.
So it's almost like an eminent domain.
Okay, Rod?
Yeah.
So Alicia, thank you for that explanation on that text amendment. And I have to say that I am a hard no on this happening. Absolutely not. So, but thank you. And I will make sure to review or read that area of the text amendment.
Did someone say that Dante sent it to us?
Yes, he did. It's the gaming text amendment.
Yes, he did send it.
Thank you.
And what's important about it is not a lot of language in it. It's a very simple language. And it's added because casinos are not allowed in New York City. So it's not even a part of the current zoning law. So there's no category for casino. So they're just adding a new category, which is casino. And then they're just basically saying you could just put it in with no restrictions. I mean, that's the scariest part. No restrictions. A lot of community boards have already voted against this. The Queens and the Manhattan, they voted against it.
Oh, yes,
So-
they were also planning on putting one in Coney Island, and I believe
Yes.
the community opposed that.
So there's a lot of community boards that are definitely saying no to that particular amendment.
Okay, anybody else? How do we feel about having a casino? You know, so one thing that some of us were talking about is it might not be a casino, a full-size casino necessarily, but you know, do we end up getting more of like these numbers operations or off-track betting and things like that, which, you know, I'm sure you guys remember this from the 80s. They're pretty seedy places and most of them had to be shut down. You know, so that's a possibility as well.
Yes, because the text amendments say specifically that accompanying businesses, they will be allowed to have accompanying business. Any business that supports a casino will be allowed to also exist along with the casino.
Rod, do you still have a comment? Your hand is still up?
Yeah. So I if we're in a housing crisis and whatnot, I mean, I don't even comprehend how casinos can even be thought of. All right. If we need businesses, manufacturing, light manufacturing, whatever, okay, fine. Casinos, absolutely not. Because you don't want it. Trust me, you don't want it. Just leave it out. You don't want it. It's a hard no. And we should just vote just like all the others have in Coney Island and Queens, and we don't want it.
Okay, well, so as to why would you want this at all, I would say the casinos are going to have to pay a $500 million license fee to the state. That's not chump change. We're in a budget crisis. You know, that said, you know, as I wrote here, we do not believe a casino is appropriate anywhere in our district. And we object to the community boards being removed from the approval process. You know,
I have my hand raised.
okay.
They're basically stating that casinos will bring in almost $2 billion, the ones that they're trying to propose, the 3 casinos that they are. So they're talking about the generation of a lot of money and wealth. However, there's also been some research that says casinos don't bring in that kind of revenue, especially if you're going to allow so many. If you're going to allow a whole lot of casinos now all over the city, one would think that you will not be able to generate that kind of revenue. But currently there's a belief that they could generate at least $2 billion in revenue for based upon their own, statistical analysis, wherever they get it from. I don't know. But this is about money. Let's just put it like that.
It's 8:22. I'm hearing that people are opposed to this. So do we agree that it's just not appropriate anywhere in our district? Is that what we want to say?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But I agree with
Yes.
Nicola that it needs to be a different text amendment proposal, because this is a separate text amendment. It's not a part of the city of Yes. And so I think that the community boards have to vote separately on this proposal. And so you should have a separate, whatever.
Document.
Right, a separate
Yeah,
document.
that's
that
fine.
says-
We can do that.
We don't want to lump it up and then they say that we didn't submit our response to the casino. We want to make sure.
We can definitely do that. Okay. So it's 8:23. Let's take the next 7 minutes, or actually next 5 minutes to talk about Proposal 12, introduce corridor design rules that promote better activated ground floors. I mean, again, I think this is something, that I didn't particularly comment on because I don't know how much difference this is really going to make one way or the other. But if anybody does know and does feel strongly about this, comments, please. Alicia.
Well, what we do know is that they are trying to allow more commercial, especially in more commercial businesses inside of residential buildings, especially your C4, C5, C6, and not C8, C7. So this is supposed to help with that, because you're supposed to be trying to create you're supposed to be creating walls, so to speak, between the businesses and the residential. So this is supposed to be helping to accomplish that goal. And so that there could be a separate entrance to the commercial. The commercial could, especially in the density, the C8 4s and up, the commercial could be on any floor. They could be up on the roof, they could be up on the 7th floor, the 8th floor, it doesn't matter. And so they're basically saying that they need to have the permission to be able to change those corridors, so that they can accommodate the rule that says that you have to keep the commercial businesses separate from the residential businesses and residential apartments, even though they can go on top of residential apartments and on below residential apartments. There has to be, it's like a separate entrance and a separate way of going to the commercial. So I believe that this is introducing that allowance.
Anybody else?
I'm not sure. I thought this was about the ground floor design to make
Yeah.
it more appealing.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think they separated it too.
Okay, yes, okay. You're right, Nicola, I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think I got the impression that what this was about was like in Manhattan, there are a lot of these ghost kitchens popping up that basically have the ground floor windows papered over, and people are objecting to that, as of course they would. I just think that, I'm opposed to the idea of these, as they say, like micro distribution, wholesale, whatever, non-active retail uses. I think we've made that pretty clear throughout this document. And if that's not allowed, then, this is kind of besides the point. The issue is not, to me, the issue is not just how it looks. It's you have like 50 mopeds parked out front and running all over the sidewalk, because that's what a ghost kitchen ends up being. It's a delivery hub.
So our concern is the use of the ground floor, the types of businesses on the ground floor levels of these buildings, not just the design.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, everybody wants better design. But I think, you know, I guess to be honest, like I felt like if we defeat the other crap, then you know, the design should uh should kind of follow naturally, right? I mean, retail businesses tend to have active retail businesses have an incentive um to have nice store windows to attract customers. Should we make, I don't know, I guess, should we make any comment?
It's my understanding, now that I've been corrected about which one this is, my understanding that they want to basically duplicate the way Manhattan into their commercial businesses interact with the public. So, you know, these, you know, they basically build up to the property line, you know, da 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 da, and have a Manhattan feel. Like Manhattan has a certain type of feel when you're walking down their blocks and their quarters, which is very different, say, for, you know, Brooklyn or for Queens or Staten Island, who also have very different types of ways in which they interact. I mean, like for Staten Island, they have all these setbacks, they got all this greenery, they got, you know, parking lots and all that stuff. And they're going to allow basically the type of look, commercial look that's now in Manhattan to be everywhere. And I think that's, to me, that's a little dangerous, because I think that each community and borough should have its own feel. I don't know if I want to walk down, you know, I walk down Manhattan, you know, I see their stores. I'm not sure if I want that, you know, in New York. I mean, in our community, I kind of like the setbacks. I like the greenery. I like the parking lots.
The drive-through, is this the one that would get rid of drive-throughs or try to get rid of drive-throughs?
I don't know. I don't know. I didn't read it. To be honest with you, I didn't read it that well. Because I just said, oh no, we don't want to look like Manhattan. But I didn't get it very in detail.
Regina?
Everything Alicia said, but I think in writing this sentence, we oppose this. Because yes, there's differences by each community. So, you know, that really does need to be a decision. Or conversations at least done at the local level. And if they try to standardize New York City when each micro neighborhood, even in this district, we have vastly, you know, things are different by area. Well, if we're talking corridor, then fine, but it's still, there are variances. So it does, the simple opposing it due to the variations across neighborhoods.
John Craver, you're a commercial architect, right? Do you know what this is about exactly?
Unfortunately, I don't. I've been trying, and I've been spending the last 10 minutes trying to Google, and the city resources are not that helpful or transparent as to what this is. So I need to look into this some more and find out what this is all about, because it might be okay, but it might, again, I think I'm concerned about where it could potentially lead to. I'm all in favor of getting rid of drive-up windows and things like that, because that's very anti-city, in my opinion. So it's very, very suburban, and I'm all good with that in CB9 in Brooklyn for the most part.
But see, on this side of Brooklyn, it's a little different. So, you know, that's where I go for, like, it's different in each micro neighborhood. Everyone
Yeah,
does
the eastern part of the district is very different. Yep.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't even, you know, I'm not even positive that the corridor design rules would have anything to do with whether drive-throughs are allowed. So I'm kind of like comfortable with, I feel like we've made the point throughout the document that we think that, you know, there needs to be individual responses to different conditions. I'm kind of comfortable with not saying anything if we're not sure exactly what this proposal is about. Um, does anybody, I mean, do people prefer to not have a comment, or do we want to just reiterate that we believe that DCP must work with individual communities and on corridor design rules or something like that? I don't think it's necessary because I think that we've, made that point throughout the document, as I said, but
I don't mind
Okay.
doing just that simple language just so there's no assumption that we're good with it. But no, just a simple statement that we oppose based on those factors that you just stated.
I mean, I don't really want to say we oppose if we don't know exactly what it says, but I think we can just say what we're for, right?
Well,
I'm not, I think I have to agree with Gina. I think we should say a no and then just it,
it's
no.
supposed, sorry.
They
It's
did
supposed-
say in the text amendment that this is supposed to be modeling after Manhattan, corridors and the way in which they interact with the community. Do we want that? It's a part of their resolution. It is a part of the text amendment. That was one of
Okay.
the,
Somebody give me the zoning text reference to this.
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I'm saying opposed into any broad brush rule changes that would impose any design, restrictions or things people must have or whatever have you, without, the impact or it being a local decision or going through the community boards or however you want to word it, but something simple enough to say no broad brush rule implementation on design.
Okay. So, God, I lost my place here. Okay, so how about we say CB9 believes that DCP must work with each community to implement appropriate customized corridor design rules.
well, that's the rationale. What is the position?
Rather than imposing okay. If somebody can find me the zoning text rule, so we can actually look at it, then it's an easy matter to say yes or no.
If you go to, I wish we had chat. I can email it. I took a
It should just-
screenshot of the slides.
All
I
right,
mean, I just from the presentation slide.
okay, but do you have a do you have a zoning text reference? Because we've seen over and over again that what they said in the slides is not what they put in the zoning text.
Yeah.
So we really need to see that. I mean, I didn't see anything, but then again, it was 664 pages. I mean, I think it's okay, not to have an exact position on everything. I think there are going to be community boards that know exactly what this is about and have a position on it. I think it's enough for us to just say that they need to throw this thing out and come back to us individually. And at that point, we can also come to them and say what our issues are. I think that's really preferable.
Okay, if you give me a minute, I will find it.
Okay.
But you can go ahead and continue while I find it.
Well, because the next step, we want to vote on this whole thing. We got to get this done.
Okay, here it is. The streetscape regulations, that's 3230. The provisions of section 3230 inclusive sets forth streetscape regulations on designated street frontages. Applied to developments and ground floor level enlargements of buildings. With tiers A, B, and C. However, the provisions, let me give you the proposal would create consistent set of streetscape regulations for commercial districts citywide. That new development uses contribute to the activity of their commercial streets. These would borrow concepts that many special districts have to reflect the wide variety of conditions found in the city's commercial areas.
But it doesn't say exactly what those rules are. It just says.
Yes, it does says what the rules are.
Okay, so what exactly,
I just sent you a slide that probably refers to the same thing, but at least it's in a chart format, so it might be a little easier for people to understand and
so
save
like,
Alicia
for
reading it.
example, if they're proposing rules about frontages, are there going to be specific limits on how many feet a specific?
Well, they're saying what they're allowing is for you now to violate those rules that currently exist with a BSA permit. So that currently you have the rules of, the frontage, how much, 1,000 feet from the ramps, et cetera, but if you want to, get around that, you now can go and have a BSA permit.
Okay, but they're saying that they're introducing corridor design rules, not modifying them. So what corridor design rules are they?
But these are the rules. Provisions set forth streetscape regulations on designated street frontages. Such provisions shall apply as follows. And then they just give you the sections 32, 31, 32, 32, 32, 33, inclusive apply to the developments and ground floor leverage enlargements of buildings. But however, the provision shall not apply to limited access expressways, freeways, parkways, or highways. And if you want to change the prevailing usage, you can go to the Board of Standards of Appeal and ask for a permit.
So that's exactly what we kind of noted up at the top, is that they're really gutting anything that they've proposed. They're going back and undoing with these special permits that they stuck in at the end, right? So that's the same as for everything, right? Any standard that they proposed, they're also proposing to undo with a special permit.
Right, and they're also they have 3 tiers. They have a street frontage tier A, tier B, and tier C. These are new tiers. and shall be a portion of the ground floor level, frontage of a zoning lot in C1 or C2 districts, C4 through C7, M1 districts paired with a residential district. And then the tier A would have the simplest rules. These are designed to access far from transit, but are not fully auto-oriented like the areas nearest highways. So they're basically saying, you know, they're not going to accommodate traffic because these are supposed to be businesses that will have, you know, will have, you know, transit available.
Well, okay, so wait a second. Let's just think about this in terms of like an actual example, like for Franklin Avenue, which is they want to add commercial there. So what specific rules are going to apply to the design of that ground floor commercial?
They said in these
Not far
areas, the
from
length
transit.
of a blank wall would be limited and open parking between the buildings and the sidewalk would be restricted. In addition, any ground floor parking would have to be squeezed or wrapped with floor area. And the tier 2 street frontage, the tier 2 frontage would have more detailed rules befitting their locations near transit where a commercial district is mapped. Fully on both sides of the street or no infrastructure blocks access across the street.
Okay, so it's basically restricting situations like what we have at 626 Flatbush where there's a big gap, right? Because they have a huge curb cut between the buildings for their garage, or like patio gardens, there's a huge curb cut, right? Is that basically what it's doing, is eliminating those big curb cuts and driveways?
Well, yeah, they're basically saying that in C1 or C2 or C4 through C7 districts or M1 paired with a residential district. So that means, yeah, anything with a commercial overlay. That's in a
In
tier.
the transit oriented area.
Right, and it, you know, making it very simplistic, they're not allowed, you know. Okay, so those are it. My position, just say no.
I think we should, I think that it's appropriate for us to say that we want for them to work with us, because there may be cases where we think that's appropriate and there may be cases where we think that it's not. And
well, they're basically saying that they're going to not work with you, that a BSA permit will be allowed. And the BSA permits are currently not allowed on streetscapes. According to that, this is going to be a new rule that they can change these rules and all they have to do is get a BSA permit. I think that that's a bad precedent. Allowing, you know, now again, not allowing the community to have a say. This rule is going to basically eliminate the community's voice because it's going to be a BSA permit.
all right, anybody else want to comment on this?
I say no.
Yeah,
I agree. I agree with the fact that, again, once again, they're trying to make a broad brush change that they know is not going to be applicable to many communities, and they're giving this back end BSA as a way to get out of it.
Right.
And that would, but eliminating the community's input. So we stand on, you know, no broad brush change. Each community has, it's too varied to make general design changes like this, and provide an exemption that does not include community input and city council input.
Anybody else have any comments?
I agree with all of that.
Okay. So how do we feel about this language that I just put in here? CB9 believes that DCP must work with each community to implement appropriate customized corridor design rules rather than imposing broad brush citywide rules.
Yes, but you should say CB9 opposes.
Okay.
Opposes the proposal.
Right.
Okay, how do we like that? CB9 opposes the proposal to impose broad brush citywide rules. Instead, DCP must work with each community to implement appropriate customized corridor design rules.
As well as
Love it.
eliminate the BSA permit. Because that's a new rule of the BSA permit. They never had that before.
Yeah, so basically this is something that applies to absolutely these BSA permits for them to get out of anything. It's like the get out of jail free card. This is this is what I was trying to say, like up top, that they're
Yeah.
trying to put in this I think maybe we should make that clear in the overview that that we oppose these kind of get out of jail free cards.
But I also think you can add that into that explanation, is that we also oppose.
Well, I mean, it's not that I'm opposed to doing that. It's just that that applies to every single proposal in here. So I want like something, you know, and we're not necessarily stating it for everything. So rather than calling it out for one specific proposal, I want to call it out that it's a problem in the entire document. You know what I mean? Because if we only mention it in one place, it looks like we're only opposed to it in one place. Okay, so I think we should put something in the overview. In addition to our opposition, just covering. Okay, so I'm going to say, in particular, a series of new special permits would allow nearly all environmental and performance standards to be waived. Okay. All right. Okay, it is 8:50. We should vote on the whole thing. Let me make sure that we still have everybody with us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've lost Beverly. But we still have
No,
5.
I'm here.
Oh, Beverly's still here. Okay, good. Okay, so are we ready to vote on this document? I'm going to make a motion that we vote to approve this.
Point of order. The chair cannot make a motion.
Is that really true?
Yes, that's really true. The chair cannot make a motion.
It's true.
Okay, somebody make a motion to vote on this so we can get out of here.
I make a motion to vote on this. Sorry, my voice.
All right, thank you, Vanessa. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. So I'm going to call the roll. Suki Cheong, yes. Vanessa Raptopoulos,
Yes.
John Craver,
Yes.
Beverly Newsom,
Yes.
Regina Clark,
Yes.
Nicola Cox,
Yes.
So Esteban Harron is absent. And I think that is the whole committee. Okay, good. So we're gonna pass this on to the executive committee. Is Mia still here? Mia?
Hey, Suki, how are you? I'm still
Hey.
here.
Thank you for still being here. So we're gonna pass on this summary to the committee. We will also pass on the further discussions and explanations, but you know, as everyone has said, that is probably not going to be read. But
I think we should delete it. I think it's gonna overwhelm them.
Okay.
Suki, if you just want to clean up the document and send it
That's
to me
fine, and then I'll send it to you.
when I send
And
I'll attach it.
do we want to pick a date for our next subcommittee meeting in January? Mia, do we have the calendar out yet for January?
No, it actually hasn't been finalized
Okay,
yet, but
so
it,
we'll wait to wait to do that.
I do have a question.
Yes, Alicia.
There are 2 text amendments that are due by the end of the month of January, and that is the green one, I believe, and definitely the casinos. Will the next subcommittee be working on both of them or just one of them?
Well, we're gonna do casinos now, and we'll do the green fast
What do you
track.
mean now, right now, at this time of night?
We already voted on this, Alicia. We're gonna put it in a separate document and send it out.
Okay. Okay, so you'll be focusing on the green. Will you be focusing on the green amendment?
So next session, we're gonna talk about the green in connection with housing. And then it's gonna have to go through the ULURP committee and the full committee at the end of the month, the full board at the end of the month.
Okay.
But normally for community board review, we get 60 days and green fast track just dropped. So we should have until the end of February, actually.
I don't know when it dropped. When did it drop? Mia, when
It was certified. I just got the notice that it was certified.
certified when?
It could have been a few days ago.
Mia, when did you get the notice from DCP about the green amendment?
I cannot tell you offhand, and I do not want to say the wrong thing. I don't have the BK09 email open right now.
Okay.
I mean, I just got the email from Dante, let's put it that way. So I do not think it was more than a few days ago.
Okay.
So we should have, I mean, okay, so let's call it December 15th. We should have until the middle of February. Okay, but we're not going to meet as a board until the end of February. So yes, we do need to do this by the end of January. Okay, yeah. But green fast track is, I'm not sure that this is a ULURP process. It's a rule change.
Yes, but it has to have an environmental impact statement, and it does go for the community board.
So let's plan to have something to say by the end of January. Okay, thank you all for coming. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn.
Second that motion.
Okay, thank you all so much. Happy holidays, everyone.
Same to you.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, everyone.
Enjoy your holidays. Thank
Enjoy.
you.
Okay,
Good
bye.
night, guys.